Another term you will hear or see regarding French wine that you need to be familiar with is appellation, or appellation in French. So what are the benefits of having these wine laws, these classification systems? Think of it as quality control. With these standards in place, you can be confident a particular wine has met specific standards to ensure you are getting what you're paying for. Let's use champagne to help illustrate how these laws and the classification system work. If a wine is called champagne, then per regulations, it must meet the following standards. Think of it as quality control. You can be confident a particular wine has met specific standards so you can be sure you're getting what you're paying for. Let's use champagne to help illustrate how these laws and the classification system work. If a wine is called champagne, then per regulations, it must meet the following standards. It must be from the Champagne region of France. Must be made with only approved grape varieties, with the most common being Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. Strict delimitation, have a minimum alcohol percentage, have a maximum permitted press yield, and have the maximum permitted yields per hectare. Then there are also regulations on the pruning method. A secondary fermentation must occur in the bottle, and there's a requirement for minimum periods of maturation on lees. And then there are labeling requirements. Pretty strict, eh? But that's a good thing because it protects you. Now, let's get to the French wine classification system. By the way, my French is limited, but I don't think I'll butcher these names too much, so bear with me. The name of the French wine classification system is called the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, or A.O.C. From here on, I'll refer to it as A.O.C., which is typically how we refer to it in the wine world because, well, it's just easier. What does A.O.C. mean? It means designation of origin. Another way to think of an A.O.C. is as an area of land. And there are hundreds of A.O.Cs in France. The A.O.C. is a system created in 1935, and a powerful oversight board governs it to control the quality of French wine. France has one of the oldest systems for wine standards and classifications, and many European systems are modeled after it. For a winery to obtain A.O.C. status, wines must be made from authorized grape varieties grown in designated areas. They must be vinified, packaged, and marketed in accordance with that appellation's standards wherever the wine is made. The categories in the A.O.C. classification system, going from lowest ranking to highest, are vin de table, or table wine, vin du pays, and then of course the A.O.C. Now let's go through each one in a little bit more detail and show you how the system works. The higher up the classification you go, the more regulated and strict it becomes, and often the wine quality improves. Well, actually, generally that's the case, but there are exceptions to the rule. The lowest classification is vin de table, or translated, table wine. This classification has the least amount of restrictions, and any grape variety and indication can be used on the label, as long as it's made in France, basically. The next level is vin du pays. At this level, the region plays a more significant role. In the previous classification, the wine can be made anywhere in France. Vin du pays wines must have a geographical indication, and these wines do not have to abide by the more strict A.O.C. classification. And now at the highest level, we have the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, or A.O.C. This is the highest classification and has the most strict regulations. These wines must be from a specific area, and there are regulations on everything from the grape varieties, winemaking methods, labeling, and so on. It is worth noting the European Union created a new overarching system called the Appellation d'Origine Protégée, or AOP. I bring this up because you may see some of these terms or abbreviations on wine labels. There are 3 classifications within the AOP. Going from lowest to highest, they are Vin de France. This is the equivalent of table wine, and the labels of these wines often have the grape variety on them. That's one way to tell if a French wine is less expensive and maybe not as high of quality, is you'll see the grape variety listed on the label. There are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, the better wines are not going to list the grape varieties on the labels. The next level is IGP. This is the equivalent of the Vin du pays. And then the highest level is AOP, which is the equivalent of the AOC, a lot of abbreviations. As I mentioned before, each region of France is known for a particular style of wine. Lastly, remember, wine is a lifelong journey, so enjoy the process and think of it this way. To learn about wine requires drinking it. How many other things can you say the path to knowledge involves drinking? It's a beautiful thing. Thank you for watching, and please remember, I take requests. So if there's something you wish to learn, please put it in the comments. I appreciate you watching. All the best.